right now.
How about searching for intangible cultural heritage that you can experience? 한소리, 제주 해녀 diving, 김장. Make some unforgettable memories while having fun.
Last but not least, the advanced level. It's the memory of the World Register. Korea possesses an extensive documentary heritage. Korea is serious about documentation and preservation.
A tour of Korean cultural heritage will become a legacy of your own.
Why not make your own Korean cultural heritage travel itinerary?
Isn't it fascinating?
Two major political parties in South Korea are gearing up for the presidential election set for June 3rd. The Democratic Party has pledged to relocate the presidential office to Sejong City as it begins its partisan campaign, while 8 candidates from the Conservative People Power Party picked groups for debates that will be held this weekend. The Bank of Korea has decided to keep the country's key interest rate steady at 2.75% amid heightened concerns over unstable exchange rates for the Korean won against the US dollar. The South Korean government has announced that it will return the medical school enrollment quota to the previous level. This comes as trainee doctors and medical students have been going on strike for over a year in protest against plans to expand medical school admissions. It's April 17, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Peunji, filling in for Yoon Jung-min. The Democratic Party of Korea's primaries are being held by region, and their first stop is Chungcheongdo, a place considered a key battleground in presidential elections. Meanwhile, 8 contestants of the People Power Party are now getting ready for debates set for this weekend. Our National Assembly correspondent Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
Preliminary presidential candidates from the Democratic Party of Korea unveiled their strategies to boost growth in the Chungcheongdo provinces on Thursday, coinciding with the start of online voting by DP electors the day before. All 3 candidates shared a common pledge to fully establish Sejong City, located within Chungcheongdo, as South Korea's administrative capital, proposing to relocate the presidential office there. This pledge also follows a move by impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol, who previously relocated the presidential office from the Blue House to Yongsan, a decision heavily criticized by the DP as an unnecessary budget expenditure and notably the site of his martial law declaration. Chungcheongdo remains a crucial battleground for presidential candidates. Notably, the winner of this region has also secured victory in the last 7 presidential elections. Meanwhile, the People Power Party held a media day for its primary contestants on Thursday. With 8 contestants, they broke the first round debates into 2 groups by topic: Future for the Young Generations and Social Unity. The Future for the Young Generations debate will be held by Yoo Jung-bok, An Chol-soo, Kim Moon-soo, and Yang Yang-ja on Saturday. Social Unity by Lee Cheol-woo, Na Kyung-won, Han Dong-hun, and Hong Jun-pyo on Sunday. The People Power Party also launched its preparatory committee for the presidential election. Chaired by lawmaker Yoon Jae-ok, the committee is set to prepare for the PPP presidential election campaign once the party's candidate is chosen. Yoon said it's long overdue as the prep should have started before, but said the tortoise beat the hare. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The National Assembly today voted down contentious bills that have been vetoed by the acting president. These include a special investigation bill related to former President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration of martial law. Our correspondent Shin-young reports.
The political standoff between rival parties over contentious bills continues in the National Assembly ahead of the early presidential election. The National Assembly on Thursday voted down a Democratic Party-led bill calling for a special investigation into former President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration of martial law last December and the related insurrection charges. In an anonymous vote, of the total 299 votes cast, 197 voted for the bill and 102 voted against. The bill was vetoed in January by then acting President Choi Sang-mok and sent back to the parliament for a revote. For a bill already vetoed to pass, it requires approval from 2/3 or more of the lawmakers present, in addition to a majority attendance. During Thursday's plenary session, the Assembly also voted down a bill that had been sent back for a revote, which called for a special prop into a political broker called Tae-kyun. The DP in February unilaterally passed a bill seeking to investigate allegations of election fraud involving former President Yoon, former First Lady Kim Gon-hee, and Myung. Ahead of the session, the rival parties issued sharp messages over the bills up for a revote.
It's time for the PPP to break ties with Yoon Suk-yeol, who was removed from office. If they oppose the special investigation again, it will clearly show they're siding with insurrection and acting against the Constitution.
These are populist and unjust bills that the DP pushed through without sufficient public consensus or regard for national interests and people's livelihoods, just to strengthen its political position.
The parliament also rejected a Commercial Act amendment, which was vetoed by acting President Han Duck-soo earlier this month. The bill sought to revise the Commercial Act to add the word shareholders to the director's duties from just company in efforts to tackle the so-called Korea discount. Meanwhile, driven by the DP, the Assembly passed a motion to fast-track a bill introducing a special act aimed at boosting the domestic semiconductor industry. The People Power Party wants to introduce a special act that would provide chip companies an exemption from the current labor law so that employees in the sector can work for more than the current limit of 52 hours per week. On the other hand, the DP wants to exclude this special exemption and instead lay out other means to support the industry. At maximum, fast-track bills can take up to 330 days to pass, including going through reviews by the Standing and Judiciary Committees, followed by a final vote at a plenary session. Shin-young, Arirang News.
In other news, the government is reversing its earlier expansion of medical school seats in a bid to resolve its protracted standoff with current students and junior doctors. Our Pyeong explains.
The government announced on Thursday that the 2026 medical school enrollment quota will be returned to the 2024 level of 3,058 students.
We will push for a legal amendment to allow universities to adjust their 2026 medical school enrollment quotas to the 2024 levels.
Last year, the government raised the quota by 2,000 to 5,058, but doctors and medical students strongly opposed the move, alleging it would hurt training conditions. This led to a wave of leaves of absence among medical students, resulting in a significant gap in their medical education. Presidents of 40 medical schools proposed that the government restore the original quota for 2026 admissions if all first-year students return to class. The government accepted the proposal on March 7th, but only if a sufficient number of students to ensure classes could proceed without disruption returned by the end of March. A surge in last-minute enrollments at the so-called Big Five medical schools led to that number being achieved. While many former students returned, a number opted to register but not attend. So even after reversing the quota increase, the government still has more to do to get these students back to classes and resolve the healthcare workforce shortage. This raises questions about the future of medical education.
We need to predict how the healthcare landscape will change 10 to 20 years from now. And based on that vision, we should determine how many medical professionals we need and what kind of education they should receive.
Universities are now required to submit revised admissions plans that reflect the updated quota to the Korean Council for University Education by the end of this month. The proposed changes will then be reviewed and finalized following KCUE approval, expected around May. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
South Korea's central bank has left its base rate unchanged following the latest policy board meeting, a decision that comes amid mounting economic uncertainty at home and abroad. For more on this, we have our economic correspondent Moon Hae-ryun in the studio with us. Hae-ryun, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us more about the interest rate and the Bank of Korea's decision today.
That's right. So the Bank of Korea today kept its benchmark interest rate steady at 2.75% as widely expected. It announced the decision on Thursday following the third Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year, taking a break after a quarter-point cut in February.
Considering the overall uncertain conditions, we decided to maintain our policy stance toward rate cuts, but judged that it would be appropriate to keep the base rate at its current level this time and observe further how domestic and external policy conditions evolve.
The central bank emphasized that it would maintain the current rate while carefully monitoring changes in both domestic and global conditions. Unstable exchange rates for the Korean won against the greenback amid trade and political uncertainties had fueled expectations of a rate freeze. Earlier this month, the exchange rate between the won and the US dollar peaked at its highest in 16 years before plummeting to its lowest for the year. Currently, the interest rate gap between the US and South Korea stands at 1.75 percentage points. A further widening of the gap could drive more capital outflows, placing additional downward pressure on the won.
So how does the Bank of Korea diagnose South Korea's economy at present?
So the BOK it currently assessed a rather downbeat economic growth for the country. The bank acknowledged that economic growth slowed more than expected in the first quarter. Political uncertainties and deteriorating trade conditions have hit both exports and domestic demand. The BOK now expects South Korea's growth rate this year to fall below its February projection of 1.5%, emphasizing the highly uncertain trajectory contingent on global trade negotiation outcomes. In short, the economic outlook is not just dim, but also increasingly uncertain. One of the most closely watched variables is inflation. In March, the Consumer Price Index rose 2.1% on year, and core inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, climbed 1.9%. Both remain in line with earlier forecasts, suggesting inflation is relatively stable. However, officials warn that a high exchange rate could still put upward pressure on prices. Despite this, demand-side inflation pressures are weak, and falling global oil prices may help keep inflation close to the 2% mark. That gives the BOK some breathing room to focus more on supporting growth. In a broader context, we're also seeing financial markets become more volatile. Stock prices dipped over concerns about the global economy, and although there's been a partial rebound, investors remain cautious.
Right, and what can we expect from future monetary policy decisions going ahead?
So towards the end of last year, it looked as though we'd have around 2 rate cuts by the end of this year. But with this latest interest rate freeze, experts are saying that the most likely scenario is 3 or more cuts within the year. The BOK has signaled that while it's open to further rate cuts, any moves will likely be gradual and data-driven. One expert pointed out that the US rate policy is one major factor for the BOK to take into account, so let's take a listen.
Tariffs are a major issue, but they are not the only one. One key factor is the U.S. Federal Reserve. Fed Chair Jerome Powell has made it clear that the Fed is in no rush to cut rates. If the Fed keep rates high, that limits the BOK's room to maneuver without currency outflows.
But some analysts say that the BOK is now shifting its focus. Instead of placing all the weight on currency stability, it may be worth looking more closely at the domestic economy.
Korea's exchange rate against the dollar is also affected by the dollar index, the Japanese yen, and the Chinese yuan. So rather than making decisions based solely on the exchange rate, the outlook is that the Bank of Korea will start focusing more on the domestic economy.
Indeed, the Bank of Korea said it would continue to monitor changes in both domestic and global conditions, signaling that further rate cuts remain on the table but with a cautious approach.
All right, Arirang, thank you for your report today.
Thank you for having me.
The government launched a larger and more efficient new tariff response system on Thursday. The Ministry of Economy and Finance announced in a meeting headed by First Vice Minister Kim Bum-seok that its original task force supporting orders and exports has been rededicated as the one-stop tariff response support headquarters to deal with trade uncertainty. Earlier in the day, Trade Minister Chung In-kyo pledged swift and coordinated action with relevant agencies as he forecast that U.S. tariffs would begin impacting exports in the second quarter. The meeting comes ahead of next week's visit to the U.S. by Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok and Trade Minister An Deok-keun, who are both set to carry out trade negotiations in Washington. Now, over in the U.S., Japanese trade officials and their American counterparts met for talks on tariffs as Tokyo seeks exemptions from the levies slapped by Washington. U.S. President Donald Trump hailed the meeting, saying big progress was made. Our Park Jun-han has the details.
The United States and Japan agreed to finalize a trade agreement as soon as possible during their Wednesday meeting in Washington. Japanese Economic Revitalization Minister Ryosei Akazawa said that while the U.S. was seeking to conclude the agreement within the 90-day suspension period for reciprocal tariffs, Tokyo was approaching the talks with caution, and the future course of the negotiations remained uncertain. During the talks, Akazawa expressed deep regret over President Donald Trump's tariff measures, noting that Washington had already imposed 25% tariffs on steel and automobiles and is set to apply a 24% reciprocal tariff on Japanese goods.
For my part, I said that the United States tariff measures are deeply regrettable. I explained Japan's position regarding the impact on Japanese investment and hiring, both in Japan and in the United States, and strongly requested that the U.S. review its series of tariff measures.
After meeting the Japanese trade delegation, President Trump noted on his social media that it was a great honor and added big progress. According to Kyodo News, Washington is believed to have demanded higher defense spending by Tokyo or a larger share of the costs associated with maintaining U.S. military forces in Japan as part of any tariff reduction agreement, even though the two parties did not reveal the specifics of their conversation. Akazawa explained that the two countries had agreed to reschedule the next round of talks to be held within April and to continue discussions at both the working and ministerial levels. Meanwhile, the U.S.-Japan talks were viewed as a reference point for South Korea ahead of Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok's visit to Washington next week. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
In related news, the U.S. Federal Reserve has acknowledged the likelihood of higher consumer prices and lower growth prospects in the face of rampant U.S. tariffs on its trade partners. Our Park Gon-woo has this report.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has warned that the Trump administration's recent tariff policies could pose risks to the U.S. economy.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth.
Speaking at the Economic Club of Chicago on Wednesday, Powell said the tariffs are highly likely to cause at least a temporary rise in inflation, adding the impact could be more persistent. While the Fed aims to find a balance between keeping inflation at around 2% and maximizing employment, Powell said tariffs are leading the Fed to move away from those goals.
We will balance our maximum employment and price stability mandates, keeping in mind that without price stability, we cannot achieve the long periods of strong labor market conditions that benefit all Americans.
However, Powell also said the central bank will remain patient, holding off on any policy changes until it has a better understanding of how the current trade policies play out. Following Powell's remarks, U.S. stocks tumbled on Wednesday. The tech-heavy Nasdaq dropped more than 3%, while the S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average also fell. Also on Wednesday, gold prices soared, once even hitting an all-time high of just over $3,357 per ounce. 박건우, Arirang News.
Organizers of the 2025 APEC summit, which will be held in South Korea's ancient southern city of Gyeongju this coming November, are now looking to move from the planning phase to the execution stage. Speaking at a related meeting this Thursday, Acting President Han Duck-soo highlighted the significance of this latest annual summit as it comes amid much uncertainty over global trade given the changes it currently faces. He further pointed to prospects of new investment in South Korea as corporate leaders look to attend the gathering as well. And in other news, South Korea and the U.S. on Thursday kicked off their 2-week combined air drill. Some 1,100 personnel and 90 aircraft from both countries have been mobilized for the semi-annual Freedom Flag. Their missions include air interdiction, counter-air operations, and wartime defense rehearsal. Freedom Flag combines 2 existing exercises, the annual Combined Air Force Composite Training and Vigilant Defense. An intriguing collection of relics belonging to Korea's independence activists will go on auction this spring at an auction house here in Seoul. There's greater meaning as this year marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's independence. Our Yoon has a glimpse.
Revered Korean independence activist of the Japanese colonial era, An Jung-gun. As a part of his previously unreleased collection of calligraphic work left behind in the final days leading up to his execution, this piece, titled Nokjuk, or Green Bamboo, is presumed to have been created in February of 1910. This piece is different from his usual vertical writing, while his signature handprint is also imprinted horizontally. Han Yong-un was a Buddhist reformer, poet, and independence activist, also known by his pen name Manhae. This folding screen contains poetry of his that compares the path of Buddhist practice to the journey of a young monk to find his lost cow. It is a rare 10-panel masterpiece showcasing Manhae's unique round handwriting.
Manhae believed in the people continuing towards the independence of our country during the Japanese occupation, and through this poem, he wanted to remind us that it is a destination that should not be forgotten.
Seoul Auction's spring session will have a large number of such relics containing traces from the independence movement. In addition to the works of An Jung-gun and Han Yong-un, there will be the first edition of Yoon Dong-ju's book of poems titled Sky, Wind, Star, and Poem, showing the passage of time in its worn-out cover page, as well as documents like records of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East. These items can range in value from tens to hundreds of thousands of US dollars. Garnering great interest due to this year marking the 80th anniversary of Korean independence, the relics will be shown in a free exhibition until April 21st, a day before the auction on the 22nd. Ian-jin, Arirang News.
It felt like summer is here already. Looking at the map, inland areas red on the map exceeded 25 degrees Celsius, with the temperature in Seoul reaching 24 degrees, 27 degrees in Kimcheon. We've seen early summer-like conditions nationwide already. As the daytime temperature rises significantly, temperature swings come around as well. Please take care of your health. In addition to warm conditions, strong winds are blowing every day, with strong winds of around 50 meters per second across the country today, and gusty winds of around 20 meters per second blowing in the mountainous areas of Jeju Island until dawn tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, Seoul and Chuncheon will start off at 13 degrees, Gyeongju at 14 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 21 degrees in Seoul, 29 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. More rain is forecast across the country this weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for our panel session coming up next.
There is no greater blessing than to have good health as you grow old. Even though my mom is over 70, she is peppy and full of energy. One day, our family started practicing Taekwondo, and it turned out to be a special blessing for us. Taekwondo family, return to happiness.
옛날에는 택시부터 시작해가지고 버스, 덤프트럭, 낮과 밤이 없이 몸이 부서지도록 일을 했죠. 그러다 보니까 몸이 많이 망가졌어요. 허리 협착증도 생겼고 무릎도 아프고. 이제는 내 삶이 다 됐는갑다 생각을 하고 사는 것도 싫고 완전 좌절을 했죠.
지팡이를 짚고 다니실 만큼 근력이 약해지셔가지고 너무 힘들었는데 우연찮게 실버 태권도라는 거를 알게 되셨어요.
다리도 안 올라갔거든요, 솔직히. 근데 64세부터 태권도를 해서 7년째 하고 있습니다.
인상도 너무 밝아지셨고 빨리 가고 싶다고 하시고 도복을 보면서 흐뭇해 하시더라고요. 그때부터 어머니의 삶이 다시 시작이 된 것 같고 지팡이를 안 짚기 시작하셨어요. 그게 진짜 놀라운 변화인 것 같습니다.
어르신들이 운동을 통해서 노년을 건강한 생활을 할 수 있게끔 도와주는 게 바로 저는 태권도라고 생각이 듭니다.
Not only did Mother experience this change, but her fellow teammates also felt reborn due to the dramatic change in their lives.
너무 좋아요. 온 세상을 다 얻은 것 같죠. 제가 태권도 전도사가 된 것 같아요.
열정이 높으신 분이죠. 그 가족 전체가 태권도 가족입니다. 아주 화목하고 건강이 넘치는 대한민국의 대표적인 태권도 가족이 아닌가 싶습니다.
We're a family that loves practicing taekwondo, so we've embarked on a new challenge.
사실 저희 가족들이 아픔이 정말 많습니다. 제가 아침에 일어났는데 반신이 마비가 왔었고 저희 아이는 태어나자마자 인공 심박기를 달았었고 정상으로도 살기 힘들다는 진단을 받았었지만 이 아이를 보면서 기적이라는 것을 알게 됐거든요. 그래서 태권도는 행복 그 자체입니다.
태권도를 해서 강해지니까 더 자신감이 올라가고 행복해요.
I believe taekwondo is a blessing from heaven. It has made us hopeful for the future. Every day, we're excited to see what's in store for us tomorrow. Practice it with your family. Taekwondo brings happiness.
Welcome to the globalists. Welcome to the globalists. Welcome to the globalists. We're in a new set, a brand new set.
I am a globalist. And I'm the globalist.
And I'm the globalist who wants to bring Jang right into your kitchen.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. In a dramatic shift on April 9th, U.S. President Donald Trump announced a 90-day suspension of mutual tariffs for all countries except China, a reversal from his previous hardline stance. The move immediately rippled across global financial markets, with the Korean won gaining strength and domestic equities rallying on renewed investor optimism. Yet questions remain: is this a temporary political maneuver or the start of a recalibration in U.S. trade strategy? With uncertainty still looming over core Korean exports like semiconductors and smartphones, and major economic players heading to Washington for key negotiations, South Korea now finds itself at a critical economic and diplomatic juncture. To expand more on this, we invite Song Soo-young, Professor of Business and Economics at Chungang University. Welcome, Professor Song.
Yeah, good evening to you. Thank you for having me.
And also joining us is Professor Hwa-Kyun Kim of Texas A&M University. Great to have you again, Professor Kim.
Thank you for the invite.
All right. So let's begin our discussion with Professor Kim. On April 9th, like I've said, President Trump announced a 90-day suspension on mutual tariffs for all countries excluding China. And this is a reversal from his earlier stance. Could you tell us, what do you think has led to this change?
So a few factors, especially the financial market factor, probably influenced the President Trump's decision, as he also mentioned in his talk. So the stock market experienced significant turmoil following the initial announcement of widespread tariffs, and S&P 500, NASDAQ showed like worst performance since 2020. And the trillions of dollars actually were erased. So this type of instability in the financial market prompted President Trump to reconsider his stance. And related, and probably more importantly, the bond market reacted very negative to the tariffs news and also some of the evolution of this. And then the yields on the 2-year Treasury notes rising very sharply, and 5 years also follow the suit. So that indicated the investors were selling these bonds massively because these 2 to 5 year bonds are relatively liquid. So I think unless some investors, major investors are selling, it's not going to move that much. So the modern financial market is very complex. For instance, like hedge funds borrow a lot of money to purchase the stocks and other risky assets using treasuries that they hold as collateral. So that means if the treasury's value starts decreasing, that means the margin call can be triggered. And then to meet these calls, hedge funds and other institutions have to force liquidate assets. So selling these kind of things actually can be even get worse, and then I think that can actually lead to a lot of instability in financial market, and that makes the Trump administration concerned about the value of the dollar and also value of the treasuries, etc. And of course, there are some trading partners requests, but I think that's relatively minor probably at this point.
Right. So with all of this, let's also touch upon the effects on the exchange rate as well. Professor Sejong, the Korean won US dollar exchange rate, which once broke through 1481, fell to the 1421 range following the mutual tariff suspension. Instability caused by the US tariff policy still lingers. How would you forecast the exchange rate moving forward?
Yeah, the major force that determines the current level of the Korean currency's value against the US dollar is not a specific one. I mean, it has shown that, as Professor Kim has mentioned, because of some surge of selling, fire sale of the treasury bond, it increases the yield very much, and it instabilizes. I mean, it has disrupted the stabilization of the long-term financial instruments such as a treasury bond. So it has really the investors and around the world cast a doubt about the ability to stability of the dollar currency. So that is reflect the recent plunge of the dollar value against Korea, and the dollar index has been reduced very much, and also the euros and all other countries has been shown some appreciation. So to that regards, however, still Korean won is very high above the 1400 won, and I think this will be determined. The Bank of Korea should not too much worry about the stability of the Korean won against the US dollar because it's beyond their control. Therefore, it means right now, rather than focusing on the value of Korean currency against the US dollars, we need to focus on some domestic issues because this is totally up to the President Trump's President U.S. to Trump's flip and the flop of his policy change. So this causes really big uncertainty about the prospect of the world economy and as well as the international trade. So the best would be just rather than focus. Rather than paying attention to the Korean exchange against the US dollar, just leave it alone, leave the Korean exchange value. So just to focus on some economic performance in terms of the GDP growth and the domestic demand.
Right. It would be more effective and helpful in focusing on domestic issues to help recover the economy. Now, alongside the mutual tariff suspension, President Trump hinted at easing tariffs on automobiles and auto parts, leading to a rise in the domestic stock market. Professor Kim, do you think this upward trend in the Korean stock market would continue for the time being? Could you tell us about your outlook?
Well, I think so to some extent. Still, I think there are a lot of uncertainties left, I think, in Korean market. But yeah, I think there's some silver linings, as we mentioned in the previous interviews and other things. So basically here, there were a lot of uncertainties about this tariffs actual implementations, and it was actually just happening, and it was very stern. and that led to a big decline in stock market. And then in Korea also, there were a lot of other issues like political uncertainties and risks, etc. So now I think these kind of things seem to be getting somewhat cleared up. So over time, probably this is going to lead to a better outlook for the stock market in the long run, I think, at least for the next year or something, or this year and the next year. But clearly, this lift of this extension of this tariff suspension, I think, is probably going to be good news. And still, the investment sentiment is not going to be fully revised positive. So I would say more optimistically cautious, but we have to look and see. So I think the talk with the Japanese, the government is going to be also important. And also the talk with Mexico and Canada will be also important because the Korean automakers have plants in these countries as well.
Right, so cautiously optimistic, but as you said, sustainability would depend on both global and domestic signals as well. Now, despite strong downside pressure from the U.S. tariff policy and other economic concerns, South Korea's BOK decided to hold the base rate steady today at 2.75%. What do you think were the factors behind the hold, and when would you expect a rate cut, Professor Sejong?
Actually, I hope and expected a rate cut in this April. The reason, because in February, the BOK, the chairperson, Lee Chang-yong, has announced some rate cut. And also continuous rate cut would be helpful to help the domestic economy to recover or to increase the confidence of the consumer. Because right now, I believe, I think the Korean economic situation right now is on the verge of on the threshold of liquidity trap because of the unexpected and abrupt political turmoil because of the martial law in the last December 3rd, and then ongoing some very uncertain and unstable situation that shut down the people's mind for the consumption. So the best way to overcome this is, of course, the political issue should be resolved by politically, but the better way to lead and to ease the people's mind about the economic situation would be to reduce the interest rate. That clearly helps, and it works. Clearly, it is true to Japanese economy for the past decade, when the Abenomics actually helped the Japanese economy to come out of some trap situation of the lost decades of 30 years. So to that regard, I think the rate cut, unfortunately, there was no rate cut and just stand still right now. But on May, they should decrease the interest rate because some analysts and economists are too much concerned of some spread gap between U.S. interest rate and the Korean interest rate that could actually promote the outflow of the U.S. dollar out of the Korean economy. But it is of a little importance at the current situation. The reason is because considering the potential recess in the U.S., actually that drives the dollar's value to depreciate, and then hedge fund or other investors, they move around cash, they move the fund out of the U.S. in other countries. So as long as domestic economy in Korea stabilized and people regain the confidence of the economic growth, I think that is a really good sign for the Korean economy to recover, possibly, but it takes time. That's why we need to see some rate cut on the upcoming several months.
Right, and it would be able, we're speculating, of course, but it would happen as early as next month. Now, as part of efforts to pursue trade negotiations regarding President Trump's tariff slapping, South Korea's Deputy Prime Minister Choi Sang-mok is scheduled to meet with Treasury Secretary Vincent during his visit to the U.S. next week. What is the significance of this U.S.-initiated meeting coming ahead of formal tariff talks, Professor Kim?
So, I think clearly the political uncertainty is a little, now more or less cleared up or ongoing, but I think still it's getting reduced. So I think probably the U.S. government starts just thinking to do the trade talks with South Korea and government. And I think this definitely has some good signs. And at the same time, also, the U.S. government is trying to test the water and see how these things actually will pan out. So the meeting definitely underscores the importance of the economic and financial cooperation between Korea and the United States. So obviously provides some opportunity to reaffirm and strengthen these ties, especially in terms of the trade negotiations. And also it is important in terms of discussing the specific trade issues, at least I think in the first cut, to talk further about like what kind of adjustments will be made. And I think it allows both parties to address these matters directly. So including other like defense, the expenditure issues and some other projects, that the LNG projects and things like that, then the South Korea can get involved. So overall, I think the initiated meeting by the U.S. is definitely a strategic move, calculating many things to ensure that both countries probably are on the same page, but at the same time start sort of more strategically thinking about what they can get and also what South Korea actually wants to get. And it's kind of like the collaborative, the strategic movement towards resolving some of the issues. At the end of the day, U.S. already has a lot of issues with China and Europe, so I think, relatively speaking, to just declare the victory or whatever, I think the importance of the talk with the Korea and Japan, I think, is important actually also to the U.S., the Trump administration side.
Right, so definitely this meeting at this level and at this timing could set the tone for broader negotiations to come. Now, on top of this, Industry Minister An Deok-gun is expected to visit the U.S. next week for full-fledged tariff adjustment negotiations. And the government said it's not reviewing defense cost-sharing talks with the U.S. Professor Sejong, what negotiation cards is the Korean government likely to use?
Just moments ago, I saw the news from the Reuters, and Trump has declared or announced that clearly the U.S. troop costs in tariff talks will be included in Asian allies. So this is unavoidable, even though the minister An Deok-gun has a plan to separate these security and defense cost-sharing issues. So, considering that situation, then I think this visit by An Deok-gun would be a really too much burden. Actually, the question says of the full-fledged tariff adjustment, but actually the full name of Minister An Deok-gun is the Trade, Energy, and Industry. He must have deal with three different secretary of U.S. So this must be a very, very burdensome to his capacity and the capability to deal with the issues. But still, it needs to talk about as the Professor Kim mentioned, some LNG issues in Alaska. But I think this is a very long-term project, almost 800 miles from the top north side of the North Slope, where the LNG was developed and excavated, and then natural gas developed, and then it should be converted into liquid, and went through all the pipelines from north of Alaska to reach the south port of Nisiki, whatever the name of the port is. It is going to be a really difficult project even. So therefore, I don't think this would be a good idea to address this long-term project for the Korean minister. This is, I think, is a nonsense. But because this is an ongoing process, therefore, the best way to address the issues of the defense cost sharing and some other tariff issues, the best one is rather than negotiating, but just as long as the tariff is imposed and just accept it and set the price up, and then let the U.S. Consumers feel the pain of the increased price. And rather than Korean economy should focus, change the direction of the trade with make efforts to find some alternative place to deal with. Otherwise, this would be a really dragging, and we cannot escape. Therefore, the best strategy, even for the defense cost sharing, is if they feel it is too expensive, we should allow some alternative for U.S. troops to leave South Korea.
Okay, so
very strong.
yeah, it is indeed a very strong opinion, but right, it does have a thought to it. So there definitely would be. We would have to look at the consequences and the reactions, and that could also help move the U.S. government's minds as well. Now, like speaking of the Alaska LNG project that we've kind of touched upon a while ago, I want to go back on this. If South Korea actually decides to join this LNG project, Professor Kim, how much do you think it would boost our negotiation power?
As Professor Song mentioned, it's a difficult project, and that's probably why the U.S. wants South Korea actually to join, because they already have assessed the validity and then the cost-benefit analysis, and then they think that either their sort of experience with this type of thing is relatively weak, and also the situation is much tougher than they think. So with their just own the expertise, it's not going to be easy. So clearly. So that means it's very difficult, but that also implies that it could be an opportunity and a leverage point for a negotiation as well. So if South Korea indeed has expertise and also the plans and also the ability to handle these type of the really long and this kind of the difficult, the geography to get these pipelines done and then make things work. So it depends on, therefore, how capable Korea actually is in this regard. That's going to make a difference. Also, clearly, the financial side of the support is going to be very important. So I believe the Korea Gas Corporation is likely to be a lead investor, and they probably can face significant financial challenges. So definitely this debt ratio is going to be skyrocketing if they start doing this, and some of the government support, additional support, is going to be necessary. So both the technological side and the financial side help is going to be absolutely necessary, and actually this should show enough assurance to the U.S. that, so this is something that can be done. Then I think definitely it can be a big bargaining point, and that's actually why they have this pre-meeting, I think.
Right. Well, though it's a very rocky road ahead, it could be a strong diplomatic tool if we would. Now, a couple of days ago, the U.S.
I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Let me interrupt you, because I would like to mention a little bit why I believe that Alaskan natural gas project is really, really difficult in the long-term project, and is two-sided. One side is the pipeline should be buried under the ground. This part is really, really daunting job for the whatever who has the contract to build up the pipeline, because in Europe and Norway, the pipeline is on the ground. So let some caribous and wild animals pass under the pipeline. But in Alaska, U.S. Demands that the pipeline should be buried under the ground, and I guess the reason is because to protect not only the environment, but also from some kind of the destruction by the adversaries. So that is one reason. And the second aspect is financially. This project required almost $44 billion. Actually, the Alaska state budget is only $13 billion. So this is the issue far beyond the capacity of Alaska to deal with. So this should be addressed under the federal government. And this must be a really, really long-term project. And then the problem is how profitable, and then the cash flow is too far away. That's really my concern. So that's why before we taking advantage or enjoy the benefit of the liquefied natural gas, that is a far remote way. So that's why I would like to separate these LNG issues totally out of some other tariff issues or other. So that's what I would like to say.
Right. Professor Sejong, thank you so much for pointing out for our viewers and elaborating the complexity and density of these Alaska LNG project. It will really be a hard thing to decide by the government, but we'll have to wait and see until the weeks to come. As of now, we will have to wrap up our program for tonight. Thank you so much for your insights and for your time, Professor Sejong and Professor Kim. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.